Okay, so let's get right into it. At the very heart of one of the world's most tense geopolitical standoffs is just a single phrase. And the thing is, this phrase, it was once supposed to be a formula for peace. Now, it's a total flashpoint.
And that right there, that's the firm rejection from Taiwan. I mean, absolutely will not accept. It doesn't get much clearer than that. So the real question is, what on earth led to such an absolute refusal?
And to answer that, we've got to go back. We need to really understand what the original promise was, and then what happened when that promise was actually put to the test.
All right, so let's dig into that promise, the original blueprint. First things first, what exactly is one country, two systems?
So, this is a constitutional principle that was cooked up by Deng Xiaoping way back in the early 80s. The idea was simple, at least on the surface. There's only one China, right? But certain regions, like Hong Kong, Macau, and, they hoped, Taiwan, could keep their own economic and administrative systems. It was actually first offered to Taiwan back in '79. They said no thanks. But its first real test, its first major application, came a few years later when everyone was trying to figure out the future of Hong Kong.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting. Look at the sheer scope of these promises. We're talking about the 1985 Sino-British Joint Declaration. This wasn't some handshake deal, it was a formal international treaty, filed with the United Nations. It laid out this really clear vision for Hong Kong's autonomy after the handover in '97. Things like a high degree of autonomy, an independent judicial system, freedoms of speech and press, the whole 9 yards. And this wasn't temporary. It was supposed to remain unchanged for 50 years.
So that was the promise. That was what was written down on paper. But as we all know, what's on paper and what happens in reality can be two very different things. And for so many people, especially in Taiwan, watching Hong Kong's experience unfold became a massive cautionary tale.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly, promise versus what many saw as reality. You see a pattern start to emerge, right? On one side, you have the promise of freedom of the press. On the other, the reality of the Causeway Bay booksellers disappearing. Journalistic freedom versus a prominent editor being denied a visa. High degree of autonomy versus a hugely controversial extradition bill. Each of these events, one by one, was seen by observers as chipping away at the very foundation of that two systems promise.
This timeline really shows you those key moments, the turning points that observers point to. It starts in 2015 with the 5 staff members from Causeway Bay Books who just vanished, only to turn up in mainland Chinese custody. A huge shock. Then, just 2 years later, you get this official statement from China's foreign ministry, basically saying that foundational treaty, well, it's just a historical document. And it all builds up to 2019 and the massive protests over the extradition bill, and finally, 2020, when Beijing just went around Hong Kong's own government to impose that sweeping national security law. That was a game changer.
Just think about that statement for a second. No longer has any practical significance. That one sentence from an official spokesperson basically confirmed everyone's worst fears, that the rules are being rewritten on the fly. And you can bet that folks in Taiwan were watching this very, very closely. I mean, if a legally binding international treaty can just be dismissed as a historical document, what does that mean for any future promises? So that brings us to Taiwan's verdict. How did they process everything they were seeing in Hong Kong? Well, the answer really comes down to their own very different identity. And this table just puts it in stark contrast. Look at the political systems. You've got a multi-party democracy on one side and a single-party socialist republic on the other. This isn't just about a disagreement over policy, It's a fundamental clash of values of how society should be organized. And because of that, a framework like one country, two systems just becomes a non-starter for Taipei. So really, it all boils down to this. Hong Kong became a live, real-world experiment for one country, two systems. And from where Taiwan was sitting, that experiment failed miserably. What was once pitched as this potential model for peaceful unification, it had turned into a giant flashing warning sign of everything they had to lose. Okay, so this isn't just a regional issue. This impasse, this standoff, doesn't exist in a bubble. It's actually created a major global flashpoint, and the international stakes are incredibly high.
And here's why the whole world is paying attention. Taiwan's strategic importance is just massive. It's not just one thing, it's a whole collection of things. First, it's a thriving democracy in a part of the world where that's becoming rarer. Geopolitically, it's a critical piece of what's called the first island chain, absolutely vital for security in the region. Then there's the tech side. Taiwan is a giant in the global semiconductor industry. The chips in your phone, your car, your computer, there's a very good chance they came from Taiwan.
And because of all that, it's right at the center of the tense relationship between the US and China.
So the big takeaway is that the perceived failure of this model in Hong Kong has pretty much slammed the door on any peaceful path to unification, at least in Taiwan's eyes. It's really solidified the conflict. And by showing that the one country part of the promise could just override the two systems part, it's left Beijing with, well, fewer peaceful options. And that, of course, raises the stakes for everyone everywhere.
And that leaves us with the big question. As the Hong Kong model pretty much cements Taiwan's rejection, the whole world is watching and asking, what comes next for what many call one of the most dangerous places on Earth? There's no easy answer here. All we know is that the impasse over this single phrase has turned our attention to the incredibly delicate and maybe increasingly fragile balance of power in the Indo-Pacific.